Hello there, welcome back and welcome to part 3. In part 2 I left you in the tantalising position having almost finished the painting of the hull, and in this episode I will show you how I painted the ship's name. So the ship's name is going to be Foula Lassie, named after a family connection to the Isle of Foula. Foula is an island on the west side of Shetland. It's known as the edge of the world because pretty much beyond Foula there is nothing until you get to the USA. And a small contingent of my family lived there for a number of years. Now, I was lucky enough to go and visit Foula a couple of years ago, and these photos are some of the ones that I snapped. But it really was one of the most spectacular places I have ever been in terms of natural geography, and the people there were utterly, utterly hospitable in every possible way. In an interesting connection to the sort of stuff I usually cover on this channel, the White Star liner RMS Oceanic actually ran aground off the coast of Foula during the First World War, as this photo shows. And there's a couple of quite interesting books on the salvaging of Oceanic. If you're interested in reading them, I'll pop some links in the description of this video. So my proposal for painting the name onto the side of the vessel is to print out some stencils on a 3D printer, which I'm then going to sort of use to sort of guide my painting. Whether this will work or not, I'm not entirely sure, but we'll see as we go. This clip here just shows the stencil being produced. So I'm going to have the ship's name, Foula Lassie, and I'm also going to add a shipping code. So all fishing boats in the UK have a port of registry shown on their side, and they also have a number. And this provides a unique identity for the fishing boat. And for a fishing boat with the name Foula Lassie, the port of registry would most likely be the largest port in the vicinity of Foula, which in this case would be Lerwick on mainland Shetland. And the code for Lerwick is LK. And so I've chosen to give the boat the code LK4. So you'll see that a bit later on. But for now, I am just going to start out with these stencils and see how we go. Right, the nameplate for the ship. What I've done, peak laziness, can't be bothered to move from my seat. What I've done is I have made a sort of embossed design, which I'm hoping I can 3D print to use as a mask. Now, of course, the perfect thing would be to have a laser cutter where I could sort of laser cut some masking tape and use that, but I don't have a laser cutter. I've got a 3D printer, so I'll give this a try to start with. If this doesn't work, I will print out the name of the ship, and I'll then cut that very carefully with a craft knife and use that as a mask instead. But I'm going to try this first because it's a bit easier. Right, this is what I've come up with. As you can see, floppy stencil. The O and the A clearly need some work. I need to manually fill in those areas, but I'm going to do a test fit now. I'm going to stick it down with some masking tape, paint it up and see how we go. So what I'm doing here is I'm just painting over the stencil onto a test piece. This is just a scrap of paper, just to sort of see how the stencil sort of performs, whether it works as I'm sort of expecting it to. I think on the whole using a paintbrush is probably not a great idea. I think this will be a more effective tool with spray. But you know, we'll just see how this works, and if it doesn't work too well, we'll have to come up with a different solution. Right. Perfect. That S particularly is really good. Okay. Different solution needed then. So following that incredibly successful trial, I'm now just printing out the ship's registration number LK4. Same process as the actual name, just a very thin template on the 3D printer, just print it out and then left to cool. And this time when we paint, we'll try it with spray and we'll see how much better that is. Right, so what I've done is I 3D printed LK4 and also the ship's name, Foula, Lassie, and I sort of masking taped all that up, and I'm just spraying with the airbrush, nice and easy. It's not perfect. Here's a side that's already done. As you can see, obviously it's stencil, so the O and the A and the 4 need their insides filling, and obviously pretty much all of it needs a bit of touching up here and there to sharpen it and make it look a bit better. But actually most of it is pretty good, and certainly with the sort of black banner as a background, it really makes the wording stand out quite effectively. Just to interrupt myself there, in order to create the black boxes, what I've done is I've just masked off a section of the hull with Tamiya masking tape, and I've just used blackboard paint actually. And this is quite a common thing. If you see sort of fishing boats, they'll quite often have a black backing, which they then paint the name on top of, and it does just, I mean, as you can see, it does just make the name far more sort of bold and easy to read on the hull. So it's quite a nice technique, and I'm quite happy with the way it's come out really. So pretty happy with that. Obviously there are bits I need to correct. The end, for example, needs to be extended along a bit so the L isn't cut off and so on. But you know, it's pretty good. It's a lot easier than any other means of doing this I could come up with. So we just need to spray this a few times. So as you can see, the spray paint idea worked relatively well in that we ended up with a fairly legible name, but it wasn't crisp. There was still a bit of overspray. So what I've ended up doing is I've gone over with a very, very fine paintbrush and a pretty steady hand, and I've just sort of picked out the edges of all of the lettering on the hull, and just sort of sharpened it up and just sort of like crisped up the lines and made it all look a little bit more accurate and a little bit more sort of like crisp, I suppose. Now this was a time-consuming process, and as I say, it required a bit of a steady hand and sort of controlled breathing and all the rest of it. But ultimately, we've ended up with a name that is really nicely painted on. And looks the part. You know, it doesn't look too perfect. It doesn't look like it's been sort of put on by a robot. It looks like it's been put on by a human. But nonetheless, it still is really legible, and it looks like what an actual fishing boat would be. It's just a bit sort of like imperfect in places, and that's kind of what we're going for, really. So anyway, I will stop wittering and just let you watch the painting. So the final step, having finished all of the painting, is just to lock in all of the detail, and by doing so you just make sure that when you come to add the next layer, which will be weathering, you don't damage any of the detail underneath. So what I'm doing here is I'm just spraying the sort of perfect completed hull with an enamel varnish. And what this will sort of do is it will sort of save this level. And it means when I come to add weathering on top, if I do make a mistake, I can wash off the weathering with turpentine or whatever, and I'm not going to be at risk of damaging the really delicate wording, lettering and whole paint job underneath. So a nice sort of fairly hefty coat of matte enamel varnish at this point will do that very nicely. So I'm going to leave it there for the day because it seems like a convenient place to stop. It's a short and sweet episode, but nonetheless hopefully one that has been of interest. If you do have any questions or comments, whatever, bung them down below and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. If you have enjoyed this video, do please like and or subscribe, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye bye for now.